Welcome to Legal 123s with ByrdAdatto. Legal issues simplified through real client stories and real-world experiences. Creating simplicity in 3, 2, 1.
Welcome back to Legal 123s with ByrdAdatto. I'm your host, ByrdAdatto, with my co-host, Michael Byrd.
As business attorneys for healthcare practices, we meet a lot of interesting people and learn their amazing stories. This season's theme is What Now? Each episode will involve a real client story with a high-pressure moment for that practice.
So, Michael, before we even get to today's topic, I have a very important, deeply important question for you.
You said important twice, and when you do that, I can usually predict that it's not only going to be not important, but not doubly important.
All right. What is your take on vending machines in general?
Well, first, Your Honor, I rest my case. I don't sound anything important by that, but in general, what's my take on vending machines is it doesn't really move the needle for me one way or another. They exist, and I have used them. So,
since you've used them, how often do you use vending machines?
Pretty rarely.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a part of my normal, but there could be an occasion where I'm thirsty and need a drink, or even more rarely, maybe a snack. But yeah, it's not a common part of my everyday.
I would agree with you that same. I rarely, if ever, use a vending machine.
You said ever?
Yes.
Okay.
Rarely. If I'm standing in front of a vending machine, Michael, and I need something from that vending machine, something has gone terribly wrong in my life.
Okay. Well, that tracks with what I know about you and your preparedness for food.
It's true. Yeah. See, vending machines feel a lot like gambling, but without any upside.
You alluding to the old hit the B7 and nothing comes out?
Yeah, and it's weird. It seems like it's always B7. That's the item you need, and when you press the B7, nothing shows. It just kind of stares at you.
I again, going back to your food habits and how hangry you can get, that would be a crisis.
Yes.
And I think if you've learned that, if that's happened to you once, it probably ended your relationship with the vending machines.
One time too many.
Yes. But Brad, we have talked about vending machines before on a prior episode. Remember, we discussed that even the CIA has vending machines.
Yes. The most secretive organization in the world still needs hot dogs at 11:30 p.m. And let's not forget a moment of silence, Michael, for our good friend, the Sprinkles Cupcakes in Dallas, where they used to have a cupcake vending machine.
Ooh, I have used that vending machine before. That's a good one. Rest in peace.
Right. Well, it was a true tragedy for my kids because they're like gourmet frosting, dispensable mechanical machine, a kid's dream, right? Which actually brings us to today's topic with vending machine. In Bozeman, Montana, a butcher shop has installed a 24/7 meat vending machine. Ladies and gentlemen, meet me at midnight.
Oh, man, it's so painful. Audience, now you know what I deal with.
You can now buy, Michael, bacon, sausage, fresh cut steaks from a vending machine at any hour. Truly the American dream. Let's picture this. You're out on a camp out. It's 1 a.m. It's Montana. Your stomach is calling, possibly too loudly, and suddenly you realize, I need a ribeye immediately.
It's pretty fascinating, and I don't think I've ever craved a steak at some time of night that I needed to go purchase one and then cook it up.
Well, you have to rethink life then. But to be clear, audience members, the machine is refrigerated, so the steaks don't, flop around next to some Funyuns and bags of potato chips, which I think is also a very important clarification.
Yeah, I wasn't picturing it being in a slot next to all the snacks. I did picture refrigeration, but I'm glad you confirmed that.
Yes, and according to the owner of this meat vending machine, it's not replacing the butcher. It's just there for butcher emergencies.
It's not an AI robot.
It's not an AI robot. That's right. Michael, I have questions you might know. What happens when someone presses B7 and their steak does not drop? Do you think they can shake the machine until that T-bone makes it out?
Well, I've always been told it's it's a criminal implication if you shake the machine. I would think it's even a higher risk if you do so for a steak vending machine.
Probably. It's a good point. So let's rack up. We can wrap this all up right now. What we learned today, if you want a hot dog in the middle of the night, and from a vending machine, you no longer have to sneak into the CIA vending machine. You just have to be near Bozeman, Montana.
I think all of us are a little bit dumber for this conversation, Brad. I think
You're welcome.
We should get into it.
All right. Well, Michael, today's story is a good one. It inspired by a real client. Again, names changed, dignity preserved, therapy bills avoided.
I do not think your dignity has been preserved after your dad joke you just dropped. And I definitely will need therapy to recover from your meet me at midnight statement.
Dude, that was handcrafted
Yes.
joke. It was spectacular. I know people right now out there are just smiling and laughing. So let me introduce you to our first candidate today is Dr. Montana. And of course, not his real name, but a very cool name though, right?
Very original. Yeah. And I guess I'm glad you didn't go with Dr. Meat.
Yes, I did not go with Dr. Meat. All right. Well, Dr. Montana, he's an eye doctor, a solid clinician, built a practice from the ground up, formed it about a decade ago.
So far, so good.
All right.
Okay.
Dr. Montana hired a corporate attorney to get the practice up and running, got the operating agreement, paid, again, a real lawyer, real money, not ChatGPT or LegalZoom.
Yeah, probably ChatGPT didn't exist, but I follow you ahead of about 70% of the population.
Fair. And then he told me, Brad, I was all buttoned up. I had my operating agreement in place. I had spent some time. I felt really confident as, where we were from a practice perspective.
Feels like a dangerous word when you say you used confident.
It's fair. It's like you can see in the future there, Michael. Well, so 10 plus years after he had formed the entity, the business is humming along. Dr. Montana has an opportunity to bring on another doctor. We'll call this one Dr. Vendor. Now, Dr. Vendor was talented, brought a lot of new energy, and more importantly, for Dr. Montana, saw a lot of good growth opportunities by having Dr. Vendor join the practice.
Okay. I see you're naming our people after today's opening discussion, Dr. Vendor.
Yes, that's correct. You're catching on very good. Well, and because Dr. Montana already did the hard work years ago, when he decided to bring on Dr. Vendor as an owner, he just assumed his operating agreement was solid. So he just added Dr. Vendor as a new owner, and it was just plug and play from there.
You use that word assumed. You know what that means, right? Makes an ass out of you and me.
I've heard that rumor before. Yeah. Now, at first, Michael, believe it or not, things are great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they always are.
Everyone was excited. Revenue actually was up. Patient demand was climbing. Meetings as partners was very friendly. There's a lot of alignment.
Sounds great, but I know this is a podcast episode, so I feel like that there's going to be until they're not moment.
Yeah, you might be right. Let's see. Okay, it's till the not moment. This is when the first crack really appeared. It was about a new equipment piece. So picture this kind of conversation, audience member. Dr. Montana was ready to upgrade some of their older diagnostic equipment for the practice. And now, understand it's a bit pricey, but Dr. Vendor actually disagreed with that idea. Dr. Vendor actually was thinking to grow the practice accordingly. They actually needed another staff member first, but before upgrading the machine, which, again, this is a total normal business disagreement.
Yeah, very normal. And you know, if you're going to be partners with somebody, there's going to be times where you have to work through things. So yeah, it happens.
Yes. So they do what they went back and forth in this for a while, audience members, and eventually they just kind of hit an impasse. So they did the first responsible business decision where they decided, well, we have a disagreement. Let's go check the operating agreement.
Okay, well, I feel like you got to cue the music with that. They go check the operating agreement.
Yes.
I guess this is where the fun starts, huh?
Yes, imagine them sitting there with the music playing, having their coffee, flipping the pages, and they see language on profit distribution. All right, check. All right, good. They see language on buy-sell arrangement. Check. Good. They see language on what happens on death, disability, retirement. Great. Check, check, check. But decision-making authority is not as detailed. In fact, it just says majority vote, what they had to go look up, which means 51% for everything. And audience members, they're 50-50 owners.
Yeah, so there's a lack of a decision tree on how things are going to happen. No tiebreaker, no managing member clause, no language that will help unstick the situation.
Yes. But don't worry, audience members. They feel comfortable with, they said, so Dr. Montana, so this is kind of weird, but there must be a state law that helps us decide this next step, so it's not in our operating agreement. But Michael, guess what?
I know the answer to this because you go to state law, and usually state law is built around a framework of minimums. And so I'm guessing the plot twist is that there's no state law to help guide this.
He's good, audience members. It's like he's looked at this for. That's correct, Michael. There's no governing default, no help. No. Now imagine every decision they have now can become every business decision can become an issue because Dr. Vendor would like to see this new vendor come in for supplies, but Dr. Montana said, I've been using the same guy for 10 years. Why do we need a new vendor? And it seems like every one of these decisions, it starts becoming more of a deadlock moment. And that's actually, as you can imagine, when things start getting worse.
Yeah, because they can't break the tie.
Right. And they unknowingly entered into what we lovingly call the ride or die operating agreement.
Yeah, I mean, that's our term that, can exist in the right circumstances, but it's really, you're saying we're going to have this relationship be such that we will work through something. And so in a situation like this, it's more of a die than a ride.
Yes. And Dr. Montana was actually frustrated. He had paid a corporate attorney good money, he thought, to have a proper operating agreement in place.
I mean, I can see why he's frustrated. He had the expectation that he had the agreement, but I'm not sure the corporate lawyer's to blame here.
Yes.
That's 10 years ago.
Yeah, and I agree. I mean, his prior attorney probably didn't do anything wrong at that formation process. Dr. Montana was the sole owner, and maybe he said he had no desire ever to have another partner. So there's no reason to go into deep, mapping out decision-making capabilities when you have one person.
Yeah, and it's normal. A business evolves, but the documents oftentimes, don't evolve with the business.
Yeah. So Dr. Montana told me he felt like, at the end of the day, they were just roommates, both signed this lease, but neither one of them could pick out the couch. They weren't enemies. They weren't malice towards each other. In fact, they still thought they were both good physicians, but they were just trapped in this inability to make a business decision.
It's a decent analogy, but not fully accurate because they're business married, Brad.
Yeah, true.
This is a marriage.
And I'll call them back and correct them.
Yeah, no prenup. I think they felt the impact. It sounds like.
Yeah.
Well, why don't we do this? Why don't we go to break and on the other side talk about how Dr. Montana was acting, using our framework that we've talked about for this season, and then also end with some practical takeaways for practices that are opening a practice.
Many business owners use legal counsel as a last resort rather than as a proactive tool that can further their success. Why? For most, it's the fear of unknown legal costs. ByrdAdatto's Access Plus program makes it possible for you to get the ongoing legal assistance you need for one predictable monthly fee. That gives you unlimited phone and email access to the legal team, so you can receive feedback on legal concerns as they arise. Access Plus, a smarter, simpler way to access legal services. Find out more. Visit ByrdAdatto.com today.
Welcome back to Legal 123s with ByrdAdatto. I'm your host, ByrdAdatto, with my co-host, Michael Byrd. Now, Michael, for those who don't know, this season our theme is What Now? And this show, we're really exploring what now when someone makes the decision to add a new partner.
Yeah, so we have Dr. Montana as the star of the show. Mm-hmm. He's your client, and before he came to know you many years ago when he started his practice, 10 years ago, I think is what you said, he started his practice and got a corporate lawyer, didn't do the legal Zoom right, got things set up, and probably dangerously he carried an expectation that he was good with his corporate structure because he did go through that route at that time. But over time, he hit that 10-year mark, and it's time to add a partner, Dr. Vendor. And so the thing that happened at that moment that became a problem is that he added Dr. Vendor and kind of into the infrastructure of his current operating agreement. And that's when we started seeing some friction points, because they realized when they didn't agree on decision making that they didn't have a framework. They didn't have an agreement in their operating agreement. They didn't have state law. And so that's kind of where we left off, is this friction on decision making, and it was impacting their ability to move the practice forward.
Yeah, and in this particular case, the first phone call I had with Dr. Montana was the fact that he had already added a doctor, and and when we typically hear from a client after the fact they added a doctor or a new partner, excuse me, in this case, and then they say it out loud to us, what's the first thing we think, Michael?
Well, if it were a red flag season from years ago, it would be ding. But there is that kind of deep breath moment of, oh no, like what are we about to get into?
Yeah, it's the wah.
Yeah.
Okay, well, and because of adding a partner is not a transaction, it's a relationship shift, I think, is what the audience members really need to think about. And for Dr. Montana, he skipped the most important part of that process. We use something called the 4C conversation, which is a tool that we've talked about in other shows. But Michael, how about, there's a lot, we've done a lot of shows in the 4Cs, and it's a good reason that we have talked about it. But before we add a partner, there needs to be some type of alignment, and we believe that the 4Cs helps get the parties there. And for those who aren't familiar with the 4Cs, can you kind of give a brief overview of what those 4Cs are?
Yeah, these are the 4 areas that we believe make or break the success of people partnering together. Mm-hmm. These are the areas where that non-alignment that we've just been talking about, they can happen in one of these 4. So the first one is capital. How much money is being put in, and what are you getting out of that? Being able to work through that is so important. Compensation. Okay, well, if we're a medical practice and we're working and treating patients, how are we going to get paid under a partnership model, and how's that different than distributions you might receive from being an owner, going back to that capital? So we want everyone to be on the same page as to not just the comp, but the expectations on role that goes with that. Third, control, decision-making. How are decisions going to be made? And, whether it's big, small, or anything in between, is there a framework to figure out how that's going to happen? And then the final C is contingencies. This is that buy-sell language, the prenup language. What happens if death, disability, some other contingency happens? How are we going to protect the business? Do we have a framework to allow for what that potential transition to happen so that you're not stuck?
Yeah. And audience members understand, the order Michael gave that to you is actually really critical, because think about it. The first 2 deal with cash. How much does it cost to come in? The second one is, once I do come in, how do I get paid? And so you're not even going to move down the 4Cs if those 2 don't make sense. And then control is actually another very important one, because once you become an owner, what's the decision-making capability? And finally, the last one, the what-if moments, the contingency. So to me, if you're pressure testing stuff, that's why, the way Michael kind of explained it, it's really important to kind of follow through that. So let's get back to this story. Today's story, Dr. Montana thought he had checked all the boxes. So where did he go wrong, Michael?
Well, probably first by thinking he just needed to check boxes for a big shift, like adding a new owner. But you've already kind of made that point, and let's start with control, because this is where the wheels started to come off. So Dr. Montana went from being a solo owner where it really didn't matter what the operating agreement said, because it was just a deal with himself, right? Mm-hmm. And so, if it required a majority vote, well, guess what? He owned 100%.
He won every time.
Yeah, I know. It was pretty straightforward. Now it's a 50-50 ownership, and there was not this redefinition that we've spoken about how are we going to make decisions in the business?
Yeah, and that's the trap, audience members, that Michael was kind of outlining is when growth happens, there adds to more friction, and more friction adds complications, and the complexity demands you to rethink your internal governance. Control it should not be about the ego. It actually should be about operational clarity. As a reminder, the doctors liked each other. They actually thought they were both really good doctors. They got along really well. But if the question is who decides capital expenditures, hiring, vendors, strategic growth initiatives, if the answer is, well, we'll figure it out later, congratulations, you have just built a deadlock.
Yes, and then, the fallback trap here is that Dr. Montana, hoped that state law would be able to rescue him from the situation and be able to solve this problem, and it doesn't. And that's the reality, is that the state law dealing with corporate governance doesn't create these kind of, magic tiebreaker scenarios or frameworks for decision making, and so there's no resource there to help solve the problem.
Right. And this is where doctors need to start acting like a Navy SEAL, because if you're growing a practice, control is a pretty big element as you add in more decision makers. So start figuring out, going back to the word you used earlier, Michael, decision tree, like clearly delegating out the duties for different people. Then, more importantly, start documenting. Sometimes that's in your operating agreement. Sometimes that can be in other policies and processes. And that's going to allow you to be more, to be scalable to some degree, in the sense that you now have these things kind of outlined ahead. So giving you some examples, audience members, do you have officers with different duties and different skills? Do you have a decision matrix that then, if this happens, then this happens? Do you add multiple people, but you have weighted voting, again, depending on the officers? These are strategic tools. Again, they're not legal formalities, but again, they can be updated to meet that. But all we're talking about is like, how do you figure out how to deal with control? And now, Michael, let's focus in areas where those physicians really need to get deeper before partnering. And adding a partner is more than just, again, an economic decision. So, for example, Michael, discuss like what we talk about, vision and strategy, how that impacts that decision on the operating agreement.
Audience, if you're thinking about like great, you've just told me here's the problem, and then you say, well, how do I solve it? This is where we always start. Like, you can't figure out how to build out, in this example, control unless you know where you're trying to go and how you're trying to get there. So, using this example of adding a partner, there is a conversation. Well, what was the why that you brought this partner in on the first place? And, how are you trying to get there? So sometimes, as an example, to kind of bring this to life, a doctor might say, well, this person is going to, partner with me for a little bit and then be the person to buy me out when I retire. And so in that scenario, maybe the strategy on decision making is something along the lines of, okay, we're 50-50, but here during this first segment of partnering together, for lack of a better term, we'll say 5 years, Dr. Montana, the senior partner, will continue to make final decision making. We'll work through it together, but we have to have a way to break the tie. But we know that you, Dr. Vendor, are going to eventually take it over. So maybe there's a tipping point at this 5-year mark or so other mark where we flip it. And now Dr. Vendor gets to make the final decision as we go into that last, phase of our partnership before Dr. Vendor owns 100%. And you can use that example to apply the vision and strategy of the why y'all are partnering together, and the strategy to kind of work out the solution to a problem. And mind you, sometimes solutions are hard. There are hard decisions to make. This is a good example. You can't change the fact that there's only two people.
Yeah.
And that's, there has to be a give and take if you don't want to get stuck.
Yeah. And the vision and strategy, audience member, that's going to help you when it comes to creating the operating agreement. So when it comes to making, the distributions, that can be helpful from the crafting perspective. Because what if one of you wants to have a reinvestment philosophy while the other ones want to take out as much cash as possible? And again, neither philosophy is wrong, but that's going to actually impact the decision making. And then all of a sudden, cash now becomes a weapon instead of a resource. So those are the kind of decisions you want to start having a conversation, because depending on how their distribution is being made, again, it could be a 50-50 decision. Another area that impacts control now as a leader is what type of time are you supposed to dedicate to the practice? Are you there day to day? I mean, again, doctors, Michael, they have lots of different duties. Why don't you talk about, we always tell you the different hats they could be wearing and what's expected of them?
Yeah, if you're a physician owner in a medical practice, you will have the ownership hat. So that's the 50-50. You have the hat as a treating physician oftentimes. So you are treating patients. There may be some other, in some examples, research or academic elements to that part of the role, but you are acting on your license. There's a role on a day-to-day basis. And then there might be a role in terms of running the business, and that gets into the control. And so you used the word area earlier. You said clarity, and that it's so important for everyone to get on the same page about, what are the expectations of how we're going to be spending our time and who's going to be making decisions that need to be made for the business, or how we're going to be spending our time on treating patients, et cetera. That's where that Navy SEAL strategic mode really kicks in, because now you've got two guys that got each other's back in this example, and they're working as a team.
Yeah. So let's kind of get back a little bit into our story. We have these two doctors. They appeared that there was a lot of assumptions, obviously, in the operating agreement, as you mentioned. The one thing that we can't change or self-correct is that there's only two of them, and they're having these business disagreements, which is fine. It's good to have these honest discussions. But Michael, what happens when partners disagree? Is there a way for this to be solved, either through an operating agreement or otherwise?
Yeah, I mean, the number one way is to plan for it, and the way that tends to work best is for there to be a final decision-making process. There can be times that you could use something like dispute resolution language where you involve a third party. I personally don't like those. Now you're asking someone who does not have an ownership stake in the business to be a tiebreaker. And so do you really want even a trusted third party to make the decision that is, I'm going to buy a piece of capital equipment or hire somebody?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, no one's more impacted than the people that own the business. And so it can have its place, but I think it's dangerous. I think the bigger point is there's no perfect solution, and you want to work through it. And there's a lot of different tools in the toolbox that you can kind of think through to get there.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, Brad, I mean, let's talk about Dr. Montana for a moment and how he was acting kind of in this framework. Was he acting like a pirate, a cruise director, or a Navy SEAL?
This is where I think the cruise director analogy fits perfectly. Dr. Montana had a checklist. Entity formed, check. Operating agreement completed, check. Partner added, check. But he confused strategy or structure with strategy, honestly. The cruise director energy that he brought to this is, I checked the box, so I must be protected. While a Navy SEAL thinking is going to be different. That kind of acting is, does this structure work under pressure? Can it adapt as the mission changes? Does everyone know who's in charge and the decision-making capabilities? And the irony is Dr. Montana was not reckless. In fact, he was not acting like a pirate, which we can talk about in a second, Michael. He was overly procedural. He was following the map. He never really questioned whether the map still matched the terrain that he was under. Now, I just talked about cruise director, and I talked about Navy SEAL. What would a pirate have done, just as a hypothetical, if the pirate wanted to add a partner?
Yeah, they would talk to the partner. They'd be really excited about it, and they would probably collaborate. Ending anywhere from a handshake to going to that dreaded Chat GPT or some other quick form to just memorialize, because they got they're too busy and they're going fast and it's gonna all be great, kind of optimism, and then then they have potentially even a bigger problem. But I'm curious, what happened to Dr. Montana and Dr. Vendor?
Well, real quick, because we're almost out of time, but it took several hard conversations to remind each other why they decided to become partners, and how they could trust each other again. And they progressed, but lots of misguided anger was placed on each other. But eventually, They were able to update their governance, and it took a lot more anguish, I think, than they needed, especially for Dr. Montana, to stop acting like a cruise director and hit the pause button. And at the end of the day, I guess he wished he'd acted more like a Navy SEAL beforehand. But Michael, I'll have you take the final thoughts today.
Anytime there's a change to the business, you want to act like a Navy SEAL. There's a strategy element and a filter to how, this change is going to affect the structure of your business, the operations of your business, the financial accounting, and even the taxes.
Awesome. Well, audience members, we're back again next Wednesday for the show where we continue to explore, am I ready for compliance? What now? Thanks again for joining us today. And remember, if you like this episode, please subscribe, make sure to give us a 5-star rating, and share with your friends.
You can also sign up for the ByrdAdatto newsletter by going to our website at ByrdAdatto.com.
ByrdAdatto is providing this podcast as a public service. This podcast is for educational purposes only. This podcast does not constitute legal advice, nor does it establish an attorney-client relationship. Reference to any specific product or entity does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by ByrdAdatto. The views expressed by guests are their own, and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. Please consult with an attorney on your legal issues.